Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Red Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Coltin Schachtner. Today, we have some very familiar faces. We got Tom Stanton and John Person. How you guys doing today?
Good to be here.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, nice gloomy day outside, so good day to get a podcast done. So it is April 25th right now. We're just starting to get planted, but by the time this comes out, the crop's going to be out of the ground. And we should really be talking about what our farmers should be doing with their post-applied chemical. So we are going to start with corn, and let's start with REDSTAR branded nutritional products. What products do you guys think that growers are going to see the best bang for their buck when they apply those products?
Yeah. Again, as always, I'm not a cookie cutter guy, so I'm always going to go back to what's my soil test say. Mm-hmm. You know, what's my plan going in? What did I put on for N? What did I put on for P? What did I put on for K? My micros, what's my starter doing? And from there, then I'm probably going to decide from there where I go. And John, you brought up something earlier on tissue testing, right? We've got the Leaf Tech machine again this year. I don't know if we got one or two, but I know for sure we've got them. But you know, to me, that's gonna set the tone, Absolutely. Especially in a year like this where commodity prices. Let's go out and take some tissue tests. Let's see where we're at. And from there, we can kind of pick and decide which way we think we need to go.
And a lot of times the weather that we've had up to the point that you're ready to do this will dictate what nutrient is going to be deficient. So we should never use the cookie cutter approach. We should always check and move towards that nutrient because the lowest hole in the bucket is always the one we should fill.
Yep,
absolutely.
Von Liebig's law, right there.
Yes, the lowest one is the one we need to fill. So, John, one thing I hear you talk a lot about is how low chloride levels are in Nebraska. So, Tom, we got a product that happens to contain some chloride-based nutrients. Can you talk a little bit about that product and what it does to the plants?
Hey, I should probably ask you questions about this product, Colton. Yes, we do. We developed it. We were part of that as well, where we put together a product that's micronutrient based and that has, you know, some of the elements that are in it are chloride based.
Yes.
And we've seen very good results last year. In our plot in 2024, just so happened the product's called Sunfed, and it finished 1 and 2. And it's very rare when you do research in plots that the same product takes places 1 and 2, but it did, and I think the reason that it did in Nebraska is because we don't use a lot of potash, okay? And potash is potassium chloride, and because Nebraska and Kansas and South Dakota and North Dakota, the plain states, have higher potassium levels in their soil, we don't use as much potash. Therefore, we're not getting as much chloride, and to me, that's why we've seen very good results west, you know. In those states. In Iowa, we still last year, Colton, saw 7 to 11 bushels?
Yeah, it was still a substantial gain, but it wasn't as mind-blowing as what we got in Nebraska.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sunfed is that chloride-based product. I think it's a great product, and as you always say, you've got to have the pH of the water right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we got to have ProDrop in there, and it's 5 to 5.5, I think, is where we want that water.
6 to 5.5.
Yeah, so 5.5 to 6 would be key. But I know for me and my farm, that's what I'm putting on because I haven't put a lot of potash on my farms the last 2 years because my levels are pretty high, and so I'll be using Sunfed on it at that V4 timing this year.
And back to the potassium or the potash that we basically have not put on. Our levels are dropping in the state. As a whole, if you take the last 50 years, the soil sample numbers for potassium are dropping. And that would indicate the chloride is probably dropping in the eastern, the I states, or even further east than that, they do put on a lot of potash. And that is because their numbers dropped earlier than ours, as in the last 100 years. So we probably are working that way, and this is a good indicator that we do need to address that situation.
You know, if I may, I've got a question. So, you know, we do put more potash on Colton where we live in Iowa.
Absolutely.
However, we have a lot more rainfall. Okay, chloride is a negative charge. So, John, Colton, is chloride, because it's a negative charge, is it like boron, where we're pushing it out through the soil profile with water?
Absolutely. Any negatively charged nutrient that doesn't tie up with something else is going to be lost. Now, I do not believe we're losing it at the same rate as boron. Boron is our most leachable nutrient, followed by nitrate. I would think it would be somewhere in there around where sulfur and chloride, I would assume, are about as leachable. But, John, what do you think on that?
Yeah, it's still a salt type product that is very soluble, and it should move through the systems, and it'll move through the systems greater in, of course, sandier soils.
So that's why we're still seeing what I would consider a very strong response as we get into Iowa and Minnesota.
Definitely. And back to John saying that the I-states got their potash levels lower earlier. Well, it also helps that until very recent history, there was no rain in Nebraska until they put up pivots to do it. So you got to think, too. Yes, exactly. So you got to think, too, there have been a lot higher yields over that way, more historically, which have led to the decline. And John always talks about the calcium decline. Well, potash decline is the same way.
You know, Colton, your question you asked me, and I didn't really answer it specifically. But I want to go back to something that John brought to our attention last fall when he was taking a lot of soil samples and things that he was seeing. And I think that'll maybe help us a little bit and give guys some direction on what to do once we get the crop up. And that's, John, you saw a lot of the nitrate tests, the late season nitrate tests you saw last year. They were down substantially in some parts of Nebraska. And so if that's the case and we didn't change our nitrogen strategy for the 2025 crop, you could be going into a situation where you've got 20 to 30, maybe 40 less pounds of nitrate in your soil that would normally be there that you don't.
That is correct. We rely a lot on, for lack of a better terms, carryover nitrogen from one year to the next. If the fact is the corn will take 1.2 pounds of nitrogen to grow, and that's just a fact. But we're all out here trying to put on 0.8, 0.7 pounds. The rest of that does come from someplace. It comes from carryover or organic release or organic nitrogen, just different forms in the soil. And with all the rains we had last year, some of that left, and we still raised a good crop, but we probably depleted that carryover nitrogen.
Yeah, especially in a corn-on-corn situation.
Correct.
So, John, earlier today, we were talking about your favorite product, which fits right in there. So can you explain Elevate Plus to us and why it's your favorite product and why it fits perfectly right here?
Elevate Plus is a SRN with some ammoniacal nitrogen, and then it has a really nice micro package. Put on foliar, when you put any nutrient on foliar, the efficiency of that product becomes greater because it's directly onto the plant. But it also enhances the plant, or it signals to the plant to send out a signal to create, and it creates exudates in the soil to help mine that soil of the product that it's actually looking for. It sends out different exudates for different nutrient needs. So Elevate is not only a product that goes onto the plant, but it helps the plant, stimulates the plant into pulling more nutrients in.
I've always called it, right now nitrogen, because you've got a nice blend of liquid urea. And then you've also got in ours anyway, an Elevate Plus is a pretty high percentage of slow release nitrogen. So that urea is going to get into that plant right now. And then we've also got that SRN in there that's going to, that resin's going to stay on that surface, that leaf, and it's going to help feed it. And I think one of the big things, whether you're putting, fungicide on at V4, V5, V6, or if you're doing it at tassel, that SRN is really going to help drive that fungicide translaminarly through that leaf and help protect it.
Yes, because the nitrogen will move up and down in the plant, so that it will move the whatever products with it.
And along with the carbon sources in it as well, helping that get into the plant and create a little carbon, a little more root exudates.
It is. When I first met Ryan and then, came to work at REDSTAR, I thought the guy was a genius because I'm like, this is a very well-balanced, product. It's 18% nitrogen, of which I think 26 or 7% is slow release. No phosphorus. He's got potassium. He's got sulfur in it. And I'm just like, wow. And, since then, John and Coltin, we've made some changes. And, the first year we put some zinc and some manganese, some boron in it. And now this year, John, we've added one of your favorite nutrients.
Molybdenum.
I can't say that word, but molly. I can say molybdenum, but I can't say molybdenum. So I can't.
All the same.
Yeah,
Molly.
And that's one of those things. It's a very small change. It has a potential to make a big difference. And Tom, when we talk about one of our newer products, Magnitude, that one is definitely one for someone who's never tried a foliar before to try it and just get their feet wet. So what would you say about a grower wanting to try Magnitude?
Magnitude is a great product for if you're a grower, you've heard all about these foliar products, you've never tried it, okay? And, it's a great product because it's got N, P, K, and about every micronutrient I think that's out there is in this product. And this product's been around a while, but it's got 2 carbon sources. It's got a really strong acetate source. And so what it's going to do is it's going to get into that plant really quickly. And so, if you're somebody who hasn't, you maybe soil test every 3 or 4 years, you're not taking tissue tests, probably don't use a lot of manure, your commercial fertilizer program has been the same for the last few years, you're probably going to see really good results out of Magnitude.
Perfect. And we like to joke that you're throwing the whole kitchen sink at it with that one.
Really, it is. You look at the label on it and you're like, got it covered. Smorgasbord.
Yes. If it needs it, we got it.
Right. Exactly. And it's a great product. It's been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like the best about whether it be Elevate or Magnitude, or if you take samples and go specifically towards something, you're typically putting this in with a free ride with your, if it's at tassel time, it'll go on with your fungicide. If it's a V4 or V5, maybe the first or the second pass of herbicide. That makes these products more affordable, a better ROI. It's just something that really fits in well with your program.
Yeah, and Coltin, on the Magnitude, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it finished third in the foliar plot last year, right behind Sunfed 1 and Sunfed 2.
Yes, it was
and
right
so
up there.
It did. It performed very, very well.
Yes. So when we talked about earlier, like Sunfed, we have to drop the pH. Now that product is ProDrop. Can you explain how ProDrop not only can help our nutritionals get into the plant, but it might also help some of our active ingredients, such as our chemical that we're spraying, work a little bit better due to the bicarbonates getting tied up?
Right. Yep. So we like to call them weak acid herbicides. And so to name a few herbicides that fall into that category, you've obviously got glyphosate, been around a long time. Your dicamba, your 2,4-D, your clethodim or volunteer corn type killers, those products are all what you consider weak acid herbicides, and they do really well with low pH. Now let's take something like Flexstar or Reflex. Okay, they are not weak acid herbicides. They like a higher pH, and if you lower the pH, you can then create some issues in your tank for your sprayer, clogged nozzles, etc. But most herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, insecticides especially, like a lower pH, and they become more active. And so with ProDrop, I think it's 2.5 gallons, treats 1,400 gallons of water. They'll lower that pH somewhere between 5 and 5.5. It's just a very inexpensive product, tying up some of those bicarbonates and lowering that pH of the water so you can maximize your herbicide performance.
Yeah. And John, can you just talk a little bit? Bicarbonates are something people might not have heard about. Can you just talk about how readily present they are?
I've taken a lot of samples, and it's an expensive test on wells across Nebraska, across the central part here. Bicarbonates, most people will recommend, or chemical companies will recommend, between 50 and 90 parts per million bicarbonates. And I would say the average we're running is close to 250 to 300. Basically, what we're doing is we're getting rid of the calcium in the soil, the carbonates in the soil, tying them up so that the chemical doesn't tie up with them. Otherwise, that chemical becomes inactive. Whether whether it be insecticide or any of them, fungicide and herbicides. We need to keep them as active as possible, or not let them tie up with something else, because that's just kind of not right to put it out there and only use half of it.
Yeah. I mean, opposites attract. And if we have all these, cations in our water, right, and we've got, negatively charged herbicides, opposites attract. That's why my wife and I are married. I'm so positive and she's so negative. And that's just the way it's been for almost 33 years.
Oh, wait till Lori hears this. Yeah. Well, and not only our herbicides, I think it's a big point too, not just Sunfed, but all of our crop nutritionals. I do really think that that's something we need to take a hard look at, is why don't some of these nutritionals work on certain farms? Well, it all goes back to the water source. If you have a very poor water source, those nutrients didn't have a chance.
Yeah, that's 100% true. It's no different than, right, when all three of us sit down with a soil test and we go through it, and what's the first thing we look at?
pH.
What's our pH? So if the pH is too low, nothing's available. If the pH is too high, it's not all available. It's kind of like Goldilocks. The porridge has got to be just right. And you're right. We've got to have that target pH, and I guess I always shoot for that 4.5 to 5.5 for nutritionals. John, I don't know what you and Colton think, but that's kind of my sweet spot.
That's about where I'd like to see it. I always just try for a 5. That's in the middle. But this has been known for years. We just have not had a very good way of controlling it. We haven't made ourselves aware by taking samples of wells. And this is probably what got us part way to resistance of some of our herbicides and insecticides. And if we can address it the best we can now, it'd be very valuable, and it's not that expensive.
Mm. Yeah, Colton, is it? It's the same way, right, for biologicals. Mm-hmm. If you've got your soil pH right, you're going to maximize your biological activity. And if you're maximizing or using some foliar type things, I think of Invita out there. It's a biological product that's going to get on the leaf surface and start to work with nitrogen. We better get things right in our water if we're going to spray something like Invita, right? To
Absolutely.
make sure that it works as well too. So,
yeah,
and it's a whole lot cheaper than buying a RO machine.
we have one.
And the nice part too, or what would be nice on these biologicals, is to find where they found them in nature, and if they would ever release that data, what the pH of that soil consistently was, so that way we can match and mimic what nature is to help that said microbe improve.
I like that. Where do you think we should go to figure that out, Colton?
Well,
You always talk about it. Where do we need to go?
Well, I don't know.
The fence row.
The fence row. There you go. Yeah, go to the fence row, find out what that biology was there.
Yeah.
And go from there.
And what's our pH, and roll on.
Mm-hmm. Or if there's virgin prairies, I'm not sure if you're allowed to sample in them, so sneak in at night and get out quick. But
that's a great question. Can you do that, I wonder?
I don't know.
It's public land.
Yeah, I guess ask the local DNR.
Well, there are some areas around locally that have never been tilled, that we could do that. I have not thought about that.
We should do that. Way to go, Colton. Way to think of that idea.
Well, it's no different. We look at the depth of the soil in a prairie versus the depth of the active soil in a tilled field, and it's the depth of that alive soil in a prairie or in a fence row is much healthier, much deeper, and in a tilled field it's much less. It only makes sense that that's where the life is in those soils.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it.
And with pattern ag too, we've seen places where the non-oxygen bacteria form is, or gosh, what's the word for that? The
aerobic?
Yes,
the anaerobic.
Anaerobic. Yes, where the anaerobic are, that's where we have the least diversity, and where the aerobic is, we have the most diversity. So switching gears here, and let's switch to soybeans. So soybeans is typically going to be just a little bit later than corn, but we're after a completely different set of nutrients with soybeans. So John, I'll start with you so you can talk about your favorite nutrient, calcium, and why the importance of calcium, especially at a post-application on soybeans.
Well, I think the importance of calcium is the fact that everything else goes with calcium. I think we underestimate the needs of calcium. It was always treated as I got to plant some soybeans so I can grow good corn the next year. And that's not true. So calcium helps move in everything. It helps move everything into the plant. And as we get later on in the season, as the nodes, the nodulation stops producing enough nitrogen, then we can start pulling nitrogen from deeper if we have the right balance. And calcium is extremely important in that. We do know from experience that higher free calcium in soybeans makes better soybeans.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, is planting date, I was just talking to Justin and was asking him, kind of where things are at for corn and soybeans. And I was thinking half. He said 90% of the people planted soybeans before corn this year. I was kind of blown away by that. But back to calcium. So if we're planting soybeans, say on an average of 3 weeks earlier, how is that going to affect the nutrient demand for those beans? Because, typically we're not planting them beans until the soil is 60 plus degrees, John. Mm-hmm. Now we're planting them at 45 to 50. Does that change or maybe increase the need for calcium?
It should change it some. Soybeans are daylight driven.
Right.
So their maturity is still going to end up being close to the same. But the intent is to capture more energy from the sun because you planted them earlier. And in that respect, raise better beans.
More nodes.
More nodes.
More nodes, more beans, bigger beans. So the nutrient will be higher, and it should be higher somewhat earlier. I would not say 3 weeks if you plant 3 weeks earlier.
So if we have more nodes, then our nutrient demand is going to be greater because we have a bigger plant that has just then increased its ability to put on more pods.
Absolutely. But going back to the earlier planting, back to Fred Below in February, when you plant it earlier, it stretches out that nutrient demand. So yes, we do need more nutrients, but it doesn't all have to be available instantly.
Right.
So adding some calcium that has a chance to get into the soil and break down allows us to better capture that.
John, didn't you did some inferro calcium stuff a couple of years ago on beans out west? But I can't remember what you saw there for results.
We saw some results in the higher free lime soils or higher calcareous without a lot of magnesium. We did not see a lot of results. We see those beans being better just naturally. But in some of the sandier soils where the calcium, the free calcium is low, pH is just not good. But that the parts per million and the calcium is just in the triple digits is all. Yeah, we could see some significant difference. I think one thing that we missed by planting beans earlier, and you said that earlier, the potential is there, and I don't think we're giving enough nutrients we're not paying enough attention to everything to capitalize on that potential like we could be, and this is probably part of it is the calcium part.
Yeah, and when I think of capturing potential, especially on soybeans, I think of pod retention. And like Fred Below said, that plant is going to overproduce flowers. That takes boron to do that, and then it ruthlessly aborts them. So can you guys talk a little bit about boron? And boron is very closely tied to calcium. If calcium's a truck, boron's a steering wheel. But can you talk about the importance of layering the boron in on that soybean crop?
Yeah, I think we should be putting some boron on our soil. And yes, I know it leaches. However, sometimes that's a good thing. If especially with something like soybeans. Okay, now we don't go as deep as corn from a root structure, but we do what? We go east and west or side to side. Okay, so I still like to put some boron, whether it's a little broadcast. Maybe it's Solubor. In water with my herbicide to get some out there and get it into the soil. I still think that that's not a bad option. I think sometimes we let the fact that boron leaches, I think it scares a lot of people. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to do it. And then the only way to get boron is if you go foliar applied. But let's say you go across that field twice. Once June 15th when you spray, and then maybe if you do a fungicide spray. And depending on how much boron you're putting on each time, I'm not sure that that's enough for what you're talking about, Colton, to, if I'm planting my beans early, I'm going to get more nodes. Am I going to get it? I know some of our customers around here that are spraying boron on 4 to 5 times per summer, and they're making that trip, boron, manganese, zinc, and some other things. So I think it's important to have some boron in the soil as a base to get going, whether it's corn or soybeans.
Boron you have to have boron for calcium to get in. Cell walls are built of calcium. The bean is built of calcium. The corn kernel is built of calcium. There's a direct correlation by applying boron and then the calcium that goes in. That's pretty black and white. We can see that every time that if we apply some boron, we can increase the percentage of calcium.
And you've seen that through your SAP tests that you've done.
Yeah, and it's really consistent.
Perfect. And so with the product BMO 81, so that's an 8% boron and a 1% moly. So John, we've always talked about how important moly is, and especially in a plant that's trying to fix its own nitrogen. Can you just talk about how adding that little bit of moly can really help with the nitrogen fixation of that plant?
Yeah, John, would you please tell me why you and Colton had me build BMO 81?
Moly is directly related to the efficiency of nitrogen, whether it be through the nodulation or through nitrogen in the soil. One thing that we really need to understand is that beans cannot raise much more than 50, 60 bushels of beans on nodulation. So the rest of that nitrogen has to come from the soil. So when you apply some moly to the soil or have some moly in the process, and that comes back to the calcium again, which is the boron in that, the boron will drag the calcium will drag in the nitrogen. And if you don't have the right ratios or a shortage of one of those nutrients, you lose out on the others. And that's the moly helps that efficiency of that nitrogen immensely.
And going on with the efficiency of nitrogen, one thing that I think is really overlooked with soybeans is that they require a lot of potassium and a lot of sulfur. So do you guys think a product like K-Star, which is a potassium and sulfur mix, would be a good option to put on with your foliar pass at this time?
You know what? We've been dry for the last 2 or 3 years in our research plots, but 2 out of the last 3 years, even as dry as we were, that's one of my favorite blends. Elevate Plus and K-Star 1-to-1 ratios, either 1 gallon and 1 gallon or 2 quarts and 2 quarts of each, have done very well. And again, you just hit it. Beans like boron, beans like sulfur, beans like potash, and what nutrient do they use the most of? Nitrogen. So yeah, my favorite mix is Elevate Plus and K-Star. Bar none, that's my favorite mix on soybeans.
Perfect. Now, say you are running some Elevate Plus and K-Star. Let's say it's half gallon. Do you think there'd still be a benefit to adding like a Red Shield to that to get a little bit more potassium, but then the micronutrients and amino acids in it?
Yeah, 100%. You guys talked, I think, a little bit earlier about Red Shield, and I just look at not only the potassium that's in it and the micronutrients that are in it and the amino peptides that are in it, but I look at the biostimulant effect that it has with the phosphonate along with the potassium. And when you can put a product out there that's going to move everything up and down in the plant through the phloem and xylem, that's pretty big. And yes, I do. I do think it would be good to do that. Now, I do actually on my beans put Red Shield on them, and I usually put it with my first post-herbicide spray whenever I go in. So yeah. Now on my early planted beans this year, I planted crop insurance date, April 15th. I'm probably going to have to do that a little bit differently because I'm not used to planting my beans until May 15th or later. So, again, I'm going to look at some different things. I think you're actually going to look at a field of mine next week on Monday and take a look and see, hey, those early beans, where are they at? What do we do? Do we do the calcium, the VitaCal, or, what's our plan there? So,
And one thing with Red Shield too, especially in the Iowa plots, that when I was going out there and taking the samples, is I always go off numbers so that way I can never form a bias towards any product. But then I'm like, I need to know what this one is because it literally had double the potential as the check. Now, obviously, we did not capture double the potential, but it's impossible to capture potential if it's never created.
correct.
And Red Shield was that product that just created immense branching. And that's why I think it's a really great fit on those post applications to start creating those lateral branches.
Red Shield is potassium, got a lot of potassium in it. Potassium enhances the structure of the roots and the stalk and the leaves, and helps the respiration. It helps so many things that we can just keep that plant healthier. We can send in exudates into the root systems. We can just pull that much more out. It's just an all-round, very well-rounded, very versatile product that can go on at different times and do tremendous amount of good.
Yeah, and I think, looking at Red Shield on corn, I think it's around 7.4 bushels. And then on beans, it's around 4.3 or 4.5. I can't remember the exact number, but right in there. And yeah, obviously, if we can build the potential, but then we got to fertilize it right for the rest of the year, and just hope the good Lord gives us the water we need to finish things out.
Definitely. And one product that I think we missed out on right now that fits both corn and soybeans is Recess. So it's a potassium-based product. Tom, can you tell us just a little bit about why we should be using Recess, and the best part, how little you have to use?
Yeah, again, it's got that potassium phosphonate type technology that we talk about, and it's a pretty high percentage of it. And again, whether it's 4 ounces in furrow, whether it's 4 ounces with your post corn or post soybean herbicide, I think fungicide timing is where I like it. Really, I like it all along the chain, and I know, John, you do too. But I look at that Recess and I think, wow, if I'm going to go across my corn and my soybeans, I'm putting 4 ounces in. If I'm using Elevate Plus, I'm putting 4 ounces in. If I'm using Red Shield, I'll put 4 ounces in. If I'm using something else, I'm going to put 4 ounces in. I just think it has such a really, really good fit.
Absolutely. Anything else that you think people need to watch out for and look forward to once that post-app time frame comes about?
I think we need to discuss just a little bit about adjuvants.
Okay.
We all know that they work to get the other products we're putting on into the plant. That's very important. It's just as important as the pH. We just need to make sure that we have the right products, the right adjuvants for the right herbicides and for the right insecticides and foliar nutrients.
I would agree, and I also think we're going to see a shift this year, especially in Nebraska, because we can no longer use dicamba, and so we're going to see a big shift away from that, which is a translocating herbicide, to more of a Liberty or glufosinate type chemistry that's non-translocating. So, yeah, I think there's some things there that we probably need to talk about, discuss, whether it's what's the tips I'm using, what's the gallons I'm using, and what to use for adjuvants. So I don't know where you guys want to start with that, but...
Well, one thing with Liberty I was told in college by one of the people we went to visit is if your metric of heat, humidity, and wind don't equal 150, you might as well not go and spray because you're not going to be happy with the results. So what do you guys think about that heat, humidity, and a wind within the range that is allowed by label in order to get a good kill with Liberty?
I would agree with that 100%. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of my concerns this year is that because we don't have dicamba, right, that we're going to get guys going out there maybe spraying earlier. And if you take a day like today, it's cloudy, it's cooler, the stuff just won't work. It just won't work. I don't care if you use 43 ounces and you use 3 pounds of ammonium sulfate and you put 20 gallons of water on, you're not going to be happy with the results. So I think it is. You've got to pick the day. I think that's probably the most important, don't you, John?
I think picking the day and then not skimping on any adjuvants. They are very important with Liberty. Probably the most important chemical, or the most needed chemical for the correct adjuvants.
Yeah. And we've got, I think, a couple of them. If we're going to start talking about Liberty or glufosinate, one, AMS. They're saying we want 3 pounds of AMS. Fantastic. That's fine. If you want to dump bags of AMS, great. We have REDSTAR 34% liquid AMS. So it's basically, we've liquefied it for you and put it in a tote. That works well. You run 3 quarts an acre of that, you're basically getting your 3 pounds of AMS. But one that I really like is Redlock. And Redlock is liquid AMS, it's surfactant, and it's also a water conditioner. And the surfactant has great deposition, meaning it's going to help us manage the droplet size. It's going to help stick it to the leaf. It's going to help spread it. And then we do have the AMS there that's going to, help get it into that plant. So I really like 10 to 15 ounces of Redlock per acre.
And it really does work. I've seen it work time and time again. I've seen side-by-sides where it just works.
Yeah,
so I think it's a very good product.
John, is there any situations where, whether it's with Liberty or Roundup or some other things, where you want to have either some additional surfactant or a high-load crop oil or something like that?
Well, there is under stressed conditions, as it gets drier, hotter, low humidity, the plant hardens off. The stomates close. It does not breathe. It doesn't grow. The plant itself doesn't grow. Just as we talked about the corn, you want to lessen the stress on the corn. When you have a water hemp, as an example, that is under stress conditions, it just doesn't grow, and it won't absorb the chemical as bad or as easily. So sometimes you need to use something to break down the waxy on the leaf, depending on the plant. Sometimes there's velvet leaf has little hairs on it. You need to burn those hairs off so that the nutrient or the chemical can get to the actual leaf. So yeah, there are times when crop oils, high load crop oils, COC, just different items can really help those chemicals work along, and they really need to be talked about under certain conditions. That would be a good place to call somebody and talk.
Yeah.
Call your REDSTAR rep and say, hey, conditions have changed. Let's call the audible.
Yeah. That's correct.
Colton, if we do get into that situation, and I think it's entirely possible, we planted all these beans early, which means the beans are going to be bigger, which means we're probably going to be spraying them, instead of June 20th through July 1st, we're probably going to be spraying them in earlier June.
Yeah.
And I can remember many a times with my kids going to softball and t-ball games in June, having a coat and a blanket. And so, with that, if you've got, glufosinate and glyphosate-resistant soybeans, there's nothing wrong with adding some Roundup in with that Liberty or your generic glufosinate when you're spraying to help you with another mode of action, especially on, the grasses and the susceptible weeds that glyphosate still controls.
That is definitely true.
Now, with a Enlist bean, and not an Extend Flex, an Enlist bean, would Enlist adding that in there also help a little bit with, especially broadleaves in a cooler climate?
Yeah, definitely on the broadleaves. However, on the grass side of it, Enlist 1 is just a broadleaf herbicide. And, glufosinate or Liberty, it's not a translocator. It's just going to basically take the top off. So even in those situations, I personally believe you still need to add a little glyphosate to that mix, especially for grass.
I was always glad to add glyphosate. Just the grass is getting tougher to kill, and it would just be a better choice.
Perfect. Well, what did our customer tell us the other day? Glyphosate still kills 393 species of weeds.
And my lawn.
And your lawn. It will smoke that.
It absolutely will. Let's see what else on the adjuvant side, John, when you look at it.
I'm not sure.
Think we got her covered?
we are coming out with a new adjuvant for drones, airplanes, and helicopters from REDSTAR branded. That'll be out here the first part of May, which is good. So the product is going to be called Grip, and basically what it's doing is it's giving you the right droplet size. So sometimes if you get some fines that'll drift, we're going to take those fines and bring them back into the spectrum that won't drift. And sometimes you get the large droplets, right? That'll kind of, bounce, hit the leaf, and fall to the ground. We're going to take the bigger droplets and kind of bring them into that right-sized range. And then the big thing with it is it's got that sticking power / gripping power, as we're going to call it. And so when you're talking about 2-3 gallons an acre through drones and through airplanes and helicopters, it's just going to help stick it to that leaf. And then it's going to allow, whatever fungicide you're using, it's going to keep it there. It's going to spread it and allow it to get into that plant more efficiently. So this product was specifically designed for the drone application. And the company that we're working with, we've been looking at it for a couple of years. And so we're excited finally to launch that. And our friends over at Red Solutions and their drone business, it'll be good for them as well. So
I think that's a good exciting thing to be coming.
Definitely, especially with the expansion of how many drones are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one, it's more of a pre-plant, but with John, latch. And I know you were instrumental in bringing that, along. Is there a place for latch as we talk about that early application in corn or soybeans?
Yeah, it makes a very good adjuvant. If those who don't know what latch is it's an additive that you can put with a pre-emerge herbicide, also or ground applied, that under heavy rain conditions does not allow the herbicide to wash through the top layer of ground, and then sometimes on the top layer you'll see. Sometimes if you dig in the soil, you'll see a weed that has germinated in the very top, and that is probably because your herbicide has moved past that. And this product, the latch, is supposed to keep that herbicide in the top of the soil, but it also has a good adjuvant product if you're going to use it post-emerge.
Yeah. And, the other thing is it helps break the surface tension. So we've all seen it, especially in no-till. Starts to rain, the water beads up, right? Because there's some surface tension. And so latch also breaks that surface tension, which allows that water to go in. And then the polymers in it, John, like you said, they're going to help hold that herbicide in that top, 1, 2, 3 inches of soil. And that's an important, especially in the lighter the soil, the more important that becomes.
Yeah, the lighter and the drier.
The lighter and the drier.
Well, sometimes you see water fall onto really dry sand and it just runs off. That's where this would really help. It'll make that herbicide go into that soil.
We got some pretty cool names: latch on, grip on. I mean, there's pretty cool names we're coming up with on this adjuvant thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. All righty. Anything else you guys think we need to cover?
It's a great question. Again, I just think that, the current environment that we're in agriculture, I don't think it's, I don't think it's time to cut and run. I think we're planting the crop. We've got to take care of that crop. And I've talked about this for years in meetings. If I took $100,000, the 15th of April, and went out and set it in the middle of a field, how many times would guys, go out and check that $100,000 during the summer to make sure it's still there?
Multiple times a day?
They'd do it They'd do it every day. And you know what? We're raising a cash crop. We're growing a crop. And yes, there's some challenges right now, but focus on it. Like we've seen the markets bounce back. They've bounced back nicely the last 3 to 4 weeks. So we're planting the crop. Do us a favor. Please keep an eye on it. If not, come visit us at REDSTAR. We'll be there. We'll help you every step of the way to look out and manage that crop. And there's some good options, some good products out there, some good low-cost generics that we've got out there that we can help do things. And, just take a look at your plan. Take a look at your soil test, what you put on for fertilizer, and whatever you set for a yield goal, that potential is still there today. And let's try to manage through it.
The potential's there. We have conditions to raise as good a crop as any crop we've ever raised. Yeah, we just need to take care of it. One of the statements that I was always told was, you can never save yourself to prosperity.
That's right.
you can spend yourself into debt, but take care of what you have and do the best with it, and you will have the best results.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Colton? You ask us a lot of questions. How about we ask you? What are you looking at? What are you seeing as you look towards as we get the crop planted and we look into that late May, June herbicide application for corn and beans?
Yeah, definitely. So since we do a lot of trials, leaning back on that with these are tested products, we know what you're going to expect to see for a yield response. And then going back to the soil test, well, if say you're a grower who has sulfur deficiency every single year, well, maybe we need to allocate some money to that sulfur to cover that deficiency to help everything else work better. Or like in Iowa, when we know when it gets dry, we have a potassium deficiency. So let's plan ahead. Let's put more potassium into that plant. It's all about being able to manage every single day as it comes at you and be able to make decisions in a timely fashion that are going to be able to create an ROI for each and every one of our growers.
It's very good advice.
Yep, it is.
Alrighty. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Red Effect Podcast. REDSTAR. The Red Effect Podcast is brought to you by REDSTAR. REDSTAR, where our red makes you green.